morning, Dawg Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. We have game faces on ahead of the home opener on Saturday. Obviously looking forward to the pageantry of everything that Georgia Game Day is all about. That means tailgating. A lot of you getting ready for all of that. We'll see a little bit of a different look with Sanford Stadium on Saturday, kind of a debut for a new press box, which may not impact you very much, but the way the stadium looks on the inside will be a little different because of that. You will recognize that, and we're very interested in what's going to happen on the field there as well for a couple of reasons that we'll get into here coming up. Also, in addition to that, got a special guest that's going to join us today, Jeff Sentell, as always on a Friday. And before we're done, as part of our long drink, long finish, we'll talk to Rocky Boiman. Boiman's a former linebacker from Notre Dame, 8-year NFL vet, and most importantly to all of you, he's also the color analyst for the Georgia game against Tennessee Tech on Saturday. That means he's been watching film. That means he's been talking to sources. And I think he gives us a little bit of insight into what to expect from this game on Saturday, exactly how much Georgia wants to show. Is there anything that Tennessee Tech is capable of showing? We'll cover that with him here today. So we're going to have a good time. We're glad you're here with us for it. I got high school football for you tonight there as well up in Calhoun, which you know what that means when you go to Calhoun. I'm looking forward to that too, away from the football field. But the point is, we got high school football tonight, college football tomorrow. We're all over it in so many different ways, and we are glad to have you with us for it too. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I used to love summer movie season. You ever do, back in the day, like, the big posters at the theater. It feels like we don't quite have the same, like, summer blockbuster season that we used to have. I think some of that's just changed because of streaming, things like that. But I used to love, like, when all the big movies would come out in summer and, you'd go to the theater to see one movie, but you'd see the poster for the other movie, and now you're excited about coming back. And, when I was, kid, teenager, something like that, I feel like I spent huge dollars. Now, it was cheaper back then, but relative to the money I had, a huge percentage of the dollars I had, I just sort of gave over to movie theaters just because there were always seemingly so many good movies that were coming out. And when you saw those movie posters, one of the things you always saw was the quote up at the top. This is like the thing that makes you want to come see the movie. Best movie of the summer, blockbuster, all these great quotes that sort of made you want to see the movie from the reviewers and the folks that just kind of get you fired up, get you excited about all that. Peter Travers, Rolling Stone, you remember him? Sort of feels like he was the guy that was always the big quote at the top of the marquee above the name, the can't miss hit of the season or the can't miss hit of the summer. Feels like you had a lot of that. Well, my point in saying this is that if we were doing the same thing for the Georgia game on Saturday, I'm not quite so sure I've provided much of a pull quote for this particular movie, sort of a hype to get this game kind of with a lot of extra attention there on Saturday, because the truth is, I don't quite know necessarily exactly what we see from Georgia in this spot. It's fairly typical Georgia in recent years to be really good against some of the best opponents that Georgia plays, fired up for the games that matter most. And whether Georgia kind of admits it or not, there's a little bit of an NBA-style load management that sort of creeps in where it just doesn't seem like Georgia quite, has the same level of strain for a lesser opponent from time to time. We've sort of seen that. So I guess if I'm a Georgia fan, next couple of weeks, both with Tennessee Tech on Saturday, maybe even the road game at Kentucky next week, more on that here coming up in a moment, maybe this isn't quite the same level of ferocious, frothing at the mouth intensity that Georgia seemed to have against Clemson this past Saturday. If I'm being honest, there's a chance that's kind of how it plays out this upcoming Saturday and perhaps maybe even next week there as well. At least there's a possibility that's true. But it doesn't mean that there aren't some things to watch for, and it doesn't mean that there aren't some things that we could learn from Georgia based on how all of this goes. I mean, I think in the midst of a week last Saturday in which Georgia got a remarkable win against a top 15 ranked Clemson team in thorough, dominant fashion, there was still some kind of parsing of all of that of, Well, it was a better offensive second half, especially in the third quarter, than it was in the first half. Exactly why was that? We've tried to diagnose that ourselves here this week. We've invited guests to do that a little bit too. But the folks who've been a part of this also have their own opinions there as well. So to sort of set us up last week as a preview of maybe the next step for the Georgia offense this Saturday against what we would assume is an overmatched opponent, let's hear Carson Beck in the Georgia, not locker room, it was the podium, after the game last Saturday against Clemson, his own opinion, his own judgment of why it got better for Georgia offensively as the game went on. This is what Carson Beck said last Saturday.
I think just coming out in the first quarter, maybe there's a little bit of nerves. Maybe guys were just trying to get warmed into the game. And well, I mean, once we got in that second half, looking at the iPad, seeing what they were doing against us, I mean, it was everything that we saw on film that we watched from last year. So, we just kind of deciphered which ways that we wanted to attack them and maybe try to be a little bit more aggressive coming out at the half. And I think we did a really good job of that. We got on the perimeter, had some good perimeter runs, and then we're able to throw the ball down the field a little bit. And that ultimately, ended up opening things up for us.
So to begin with there, Carson Beck says, hey, maybe there were little nerves to start this game. Now, he doesn't specify if he means for himself or for his teammates. Maybe he just means the offense collectively overall. First game, new season, a little bit of, little butterflies in the stomach about getting back to football on a really big stage. Carson mentions the idea of nerves. Now, what's interesting about that is that it sort of feels like that's a callback to maybe where Georgia was a year ago. And this is really important with Tennessee Tech coming in on Saturday. When you look at Georgia last September against overmatched opponents, it really was not a thing of beauty to begin games against those teams last year. First game of the year against UT Martin, very similar opponent to what Georgia plays on Saturday in Tennessee Tech. Georgia scored just 7 points in the first quarter and just 17 points in the first half against the Skyhawks of UT Martin last year. Now, the game was 48-7. It was a blowout. Not covering the spread, by the way, but blowout. So by the time it's all said and done, nobody really thinks that much about it. But it was one of those things where new clock rules, limited possessions, just kind of took Georgia a little while to get going in that game last year. And I think there was a thought that, hey, Georgia needed to kind of do a little bit better offensively. But the week after that against Ball State, kind of the same type of deal where against Ball State, the Cardinals, once again, are not a very good team, very much an overmatched opponent. But against Ball State in week 2 last year, Georgia scored 0 first quarter points. So there was this thing last year of, man, boy, a little slow getting started offensively and, having a little bit of a hard time kind of getting things going. Against teams like Auburn and South Carolina, that was even more important because those were obviously the kinds of teams that had a chance to beat you if you weren't playing your best. And Georgia needed really good second halves to kind of secure victory against both those SEC foes last year during the month of September there as well. So this year was supposed to be one of those years in which I think you sort of hoped that Georgia was just sort of a little bit sharper to start, a little bit sharper to begin the games and to begin the season than maybe it was a year ago. And even though last Saturday was a blowout win against Clemson, that wasn't exactly the case when it comes to that, as Beck tells it, maybe there's just a little bit of a nerves that sort of prevented that from being exactly what it could be. But the other thing that Beck says there, and I think this is really interesting, and look, who knows how, literal these words are supposed to be taken. Sometimes you're just offering an explanation. You're just trying to say something that sounds good, and maybe the actual truth isn't as literal as it sounds. But one of the things that Beck does say in that clip you just heard is, I thought we came out more aggressive in the third quarter. And the one thing we've tried to figure out this week, we've asked a lot of our guests, is that aggressive because that Beck, given the survey of the situation, is taking more shots? Is that aggressive because of the plays that are being called? But one way or another, it's interesting to hear Carson, in his own words, talk about Georgia being more, quote, aggressive moving into the third quarter last Saturday than it had been to begin the game. And it's also with that in mind that I thought that Jake Fromm, who, listen, my opinion on this is whatever it is, but Jake Fromm played quarterback at Georgia during the Kirby Smart era. His words, I believe, carry a lot of weight on stuff like this. And so I want to go back to something that Jake Fromm said on our show yesterday, because I was asking him about Carson Beck and asking him about the difference between the first half and the second half. Ultimately, it's not a bad topic because Georgia played very well, when it needed to. But it is an interesting contrast, and I think it does preview a little bit about the home opener on Saturday. So in Jake Fromm's telling of all of this, he also sort of kind of bumps into what Carson Beck mentioned, the idea of just being more aggressive as the game goes on. And Jake made it very clear on our show yesterday, and I think this is fascinating, that the aggression that Georgia showed offensively in the second half is something that he'd like to see on a more regular basis from this Georgia offense, perhaps even Saturday against the overmatched Tennessee Tech team. Really strong stuff from Jake Fromm from yesterday. Take a listen to this.
My thoughts on the first half, when I'm seeing it with my eyes in real time, I didn't really think they asked Carson to do a whole lot in the first half. I think there was a lot of, kind of sideline to sideline, perimeter passing, a lot, kind of screens, a lot of quick short throws, RPOs, that kind of thing. There wasn't any like, hey, let's drop this thing back. Let's push the ball down the field, hard play action. There wasn't a vertical shot, in my opinion, until 6 minutes left to go in the second quarter. So I think that's just a game plan thing. I don't think really anything from Carson, so to speak. I think whatever they asked him to do, Carson executed and did really well. I'm still going to kind of, stand on this hill of I want to see Bobo and the offense ask more of Carson because I think he's capable of doing more.
I mean, isn't that a very interesting opinion from Jake Fromm? And doesn't it lay it out in pretty clear terms there that Carson Beck is capable? So offensive play callers, Mike Bobo, ask more from Carson Beck. And I think that right there makes Saturday's game pretty interesting, because we do have the contrast to a year ago where even against overmatched opponents, Georgia also did not get off to a very fast start. Can you get off to a better start on Saturday against Tennessee Tech to the point that Beck comes in, gives you some efficiency and some explosiveness, and then has an opportunity to get out of the game maybe? Because, look, it's about to get real fast for Georgia. So anything that you don't have to do against Tennessee Tech only makes you more fresh for everything else that sort of comes after that. And here's the other thing, too. I mean, if you listen to the rumor mill and the innuendo thus far this summer, it sounds like that Gunnar Stockton had himself a very nice fall camp. And if you talk to enough people, I think you get the sense that, at least based on the fall camp performance, Stockton was pretty far ahead of Jaden Rashada. Now, Rashada's obviously got some time to make that up, and I know he's a little bit banged up right now. But in terms of, I mean, just based on what I've been told from people who know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, is that Stockton pretty resoundingly won the backup quarterback job. So if that was true based on what rich donors and former players got to see, wouldn't it be nice for us to all see that from Gunnar on Saturday? And the way to see more of Gunnar is to have a guy like Carson Beck be really good near the beginning of the game, first quarter, first half, perhaps some into the third quarter, but then he's out and it can be the Gunnar Stockton show the rest of the way. I think that'd be really fun to see Beck come in, perform well enough that you don't need much more of him, not because you're worried about winning the game, but because, you want to kind of keep that cohesion going with Carson and the rest of the offense. You don't need to do that because they take care of their business so early. Plus, I'll also kind of leave you with this. When you look ahead to next Saturday, and we'll do plenty more on this next week, the week of the game, this is one of those spots for Georgia that has proven to be pretty tricky in the past. It seems like so frequently over the course of the last few years, and really a lot of years just in general, Georgia plays that Kentucky game right before the off week. It's like Kentucky, off week, Florida. It seems like we see that a lot from Georgia in recent years. And we'll get into some of the trend stuff next week. Georgia has a pretty strong history of not exactly playing its best the week into a bye ahead of a big game coming up after that, and that's clearly the case now for Georgia. It's kind of ironic that usually when the bye week was like late October or November, it was Kentucky off week, then whoever else, usually Florida. Well, now it's an off week earlier in the season because of the scheduling calendar anomaly, and it's still Kentucky that Georgia plays the week before that off week. So going to Lexington the week before a bye has proven to be pretty tricky. And that may be even trickier based on how it plays out on this particular Saturday, where Kentucky has a chance to send a little bit of a message against South Carolina as a 10.5-point favorite, I believe it still is, that they could be a pretty formidable challenger for Georgia next week. So the more Beck is in rhythm and in sync to begin the game on Saturday, perhaps also foreshadows his ability to be in sync and in rhythm for that game against Kentucky next week. Kind of a spot going into a bye against an opponent like Kentucky that's been frisky in the past, where you kind of want Carson clicking from the very beginning. And to use Jake Fromm's own words, you kind of want that trust that the Georgia coaches have in Carson to be as high as it possibly can so they can allow him to maybe go out and do what he does best. I do think these next couple of weeks could be interesting. Interesting to see how easy Carson's able to make it look against an overmatched opponent on Saturday and how ready Carson is for a showdown against a quarterback that would at least think he knows the Georgia situation pretty well in Brock Vandagriff. So the overall bottom line is this. When Jake Fromm says, man, I want to see them just, ask more from Carson. I believe he can do it. Let him be more aggressive from the very beginning. Seeing how much Georgia does that this Saturday and maybe next Saturday there as well in the SEC opener, watching that for the next couple of weeks should be a pretty fascinating thing to see. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. We are happy to have you with us, no matter how you get to us today, on video across all platforms, 10 a.m., radio, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcast, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Let me just say this real quick. I'm noticing I just happen to have the YouTube comment section pulled up. It sounds like some folks there having a little bit of an audio issue for those watching live, but it also sounds like that, and I don't hate to tell you to leave the broadcast, but just by refreshing or clicking out and clicking back in, it seems like for some people that's fixing. It doesn't seem to be impacting everybody, but it seems to be impacting a couple. And the best that I can tell, sort of a refresh of the page or a click out, click back in, seems to be fixing that. So if you're having a little bit of an audio glitch there on YouTube, that seems to be working. So let me know if that's what your experience is. But either way, thrilled to have you here as a part of the show today. And so thanks to our friends at Kroger for making it all possible. Tomorrow is the first big tailgate in Athens of the year. So many of you fired up and ready to go on that. Many of you also getting ready for your big watch parties. We got a couple of great photos as it relates to watch parties for our golden shoes coming up a little bit later on in the show. But either way, Kroger's got you. All your MVP favorites when it comes to game day, with the tailgating, the watch parties, everything else, from chips to snack, cold drinks, and all those party trays and everything else. You can get all of that right there at your local Kroger. So please stop by in store or start your shopping experience online at Kroger.com. We appreciate Kroger for so many years being a part of DawgNation Daily and getting us ready for game day, as they do each Saturday here in the fall. All right, we have got a lot coming up for us. Two special guests today. Jeff Sentell, as always, coming up in a moment. And the guy who'll call the game, the color analyst for the broadcast on SEC Network Plus and ESPN Plus Saturday, Rocky Boiman, former Notre Dame linebacker, 8-year NFL vet, now working as an analyst these games for ESPN. He did the Ole Miss Furman game last week. He's doing the Georgia game here this week, and he'll give us his insight on this from having watched a bunch of film, talking to sources, getting ready to talk to the Georgia coaching staff, and he'll kind of give us what he thinks about Georgia coming into Saturday. And I believe, we actually recorded this yesterday, total confession, I believe there's a little bit of a lean on the game you might get based on what Rocky says a little bit later on, keeping in mind it's like a gigantic, 53.5-point spread, although our spread for go with the flow later on today is much, much smaller than all of that. All right, let's get ready before we bring on Jeff Sentell, kind of as a lead-in to Jeff Sentell, to go around the DawgHouse, presented today by our friends at the Zagoria Law Group. And a moment ago on our show, I gave you a little bit of a look back to yesterday's edition of the program, some very compelling things that Jake Fromm said about the Georgia quarterback situation and what Georgia can do to just allow Carson Beck to maybe be more aggressive. I think those are really strong words. That, however, was not the only very strong statement made by a guest on yesterday's show. I'm going to ask Jeff Sentell about this directly here in a moment. The backstory here is that we have watched the Florida State Seminoles, a top 10 preseason team, get off to a very rough start, losing in Ireland to Georgia Tech and then following that up on Labor Day night against the Boston College Eagles, losing again. Florida State now stands at 0-2 with no real obvious relief in sight. This just may be a not great team here this year and a very poor follow-up to an ACC championship team in 2023 that thought it deserved to be in the college football playoff. Right now, there is very little resemblance at all to the way that Florida State is playing right now to the way that it played in 2023. So, listen, we've seen Georgia and Florida State do some head-to-head recruiting battles the last couple of years, famously for KJ Bolden. That's one that Florida State had the upper hand on to begin with. Eventually, Georgia got it in, got back involved, able to get that win there. Could perhaps Georgia be able to do that again? Well, yesterday I asked a guy who presumably would know. Terrence Edwards is the great former Georgia wide receiver. He's also a wide receiver coach now, works with a lot of the top receivers in our state, among them C.J. Wiley, who is a part of an incredibly potent Milton offense, reigning 7A state champs, now in 5A, believe it or not. But Wiley, a terrific player, and as you saw on the DawgNation video channels a couple of months ago, also a guy that announced his commitment to Florida State. But given the fact that Georgia's sort of done this before, given the fact that Florida State's kind of fallen on hard times, from a guy who knows Wiley very well, is there a chance, just maybe, that Georgia could get back in and win the recruiting battle for C.J. Wiley before it's all said and done? This is what Terrence Edwards said about that yesterday.
I haven't spoken to him about it. I went to the game last week against Alpharetta, and I don't talk to him about that part of it. I'm at the game, and I'm coaching him, and I'm not even on the coaching staff at Milton anymore, and I'm still just giving him tips. I can say this. We all know Kirby, and Kirby is not going to stop until he has no more eligibility left in college. So I don't know if he will flip. I haven't spoken to him about flipping, but if we know Kirby Smart, he's not going to stop recruiting the young man because we know how in today's game, you may not get him the first time, but you may get him the second or the third time.
So there you go. From a guy who knows C.J. Wiley pretty well, Kirby Smart's not going to stop. You didn't get him the first time, but maybe you get him the second time. Maybe you get him the third time. It sounds like there's at least a possibility. No guarantees, of course. But it sounds like there's at least a possibility that that it might not be quite done yet for Georgia when it comes to C.J. Wiley. I'll give you like one kind of note on this. Like last year when all that was going down with K.J. Bolden, the one thing that I had heard from people who know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody was in the immediate aftermath of Bolden choosing Florida State. Remember, KJ had visited Georgia like 16 or 17 times, some astronomical number, had a very close relationship with the Georgia coaching staff. Well, my understanding was in the aftermath of the Bolden thing a year ago when he initially chose Florida State, that Georgia was right back in contact with him like almost immediately after that. And essentially the recruiting from Georgia continued as if it always had been, with very little attention being paid to the fact that Bolden had committed to Florida State. They didn't stop or slow down Georgia's recruiting effort of Bolden really whatsoever. And right away, in the aftermath of Bolden choosing Florida State, it was fairly obvious, based on people who kind of knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody, that at some point in time, KJ would visit for a football game that fall. And once you're back visiting again, well, obviously anything can happen. So this is what I'd have my eye on here right now. Terrence Edwards kind of pushing the door ajar a little bit for Georgia getting back in on Wiley in light of what's going on at Florida State right now. Let's watch for this. Do we see C.J. Wiley in the stands at the West End zone of a game at some point this fall in Sanford Stadium? If we do, it could be game on. And that is Around the DawgHouse, presented today by the Zagoria Law Group. And obviously we love seeing the Dogs take a bite out of their competition on the field. Let the big dog eat. We've been saying that since I was a kid. But when it comes to actual dog bites from real DOG dogs, that can be a very serious thing. And, if that happens to you, you deserve the compensation perhaps that you deserve for medical attention, or just punitive damages against somebody who just wasn't doing right with their dog, not taking proper. We see videos like this on the internet all the time of somebody who just wasn't taking the most logical and sensible steps to make sure their dog was not able to harm somebody, harm a child in some cases, or obviously any kind of dog bite situation can be a very serious thing. That's why the Zagoria Law Group works so hard on this kind of stuff. They're the only law firm in our state that specializes in representing people who've been bitten by dogs. They're the official dog bite injury lawyers of the Georgia Bulldogs. And they literally wrote the book, and I mean that literally, on how to win these types of cases. So if you or someone you love has been bitten by a dog that wasn't yours and you deserve the compensation that you think you deserve for, all of the stuff related to that, I want you to give our friends at Zagoria Law a call on all that. The number here is 833-GA-DOG-BITE. That's 833-GA-DOG-BITE. In this case, dog is spelled the conventional way, D-O-G. Or you can also find them online, ZagoriaLaw.com. That is ZagoriaLaw.com. Great to have Zagoria Law presenting Around the DawgHouse to us here today. So before we're done, Rocky Boiman and what to expect from Georgia on the field on Saturday. How about the atmosphere around the game from a recruiting perspective? Let's talk now about all that. Jeff Sentell here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
All right, Jeff Sentell, let's get to it. We've got a big day in Athens tomorrow. Fascinating to hear from you coming up in a moment about some of those visitors that could be on hand for this one. But let me begin before we get there with what I was just discussing, which is Terrence Edwards yesterday on this show, a guy who knows C.J. Wiley very well, four-star receiver who Georgia lost out on to Florida State a couple of months ago. Terrence, without obviously revealing too many details and certainly saying I haven't officially talked to C.J. Wiley about this, I don't want to make this more than it is, but certainly left that door open. Maybe Florida State's not very good. Georgia doesn't give up very easily. There was already a pretty strong relationship here to begin with. That it perhaps is not quite over yet with Georgia and C.J. Wiley. What say you?
Yeah, Brandon, I don't know how much gas I want to put on that flame right now. The Auburn's kind of entered the mix a little bit there with C.J. Wiley. That's a team to kind of look at there as well. And I tell you, man, Auburn's got some things cooking at wide receiver right now. I do think C.J. Wiley takes a visit to Georgia. He said that was probably likely something that he would consider or take a look at. Wasn't sure when, but I talked to him about it probably last week. And, CJ's not shutting any doors, but obviously he's looking at what Florida State's doing, and it's probably not the same sort of sizzle he had, obviously a couple weeks ago and even months ago when he made his commitment.
Yeah, I mean, to me, battles like this, if they are one step at a time, like you can't hit a 5-run home run. You couldn't get, if you're Georgia, a Wiley commitment today. But what could you do? Could you get him on campus at some point in time, as you just suggested? And I was talking about before you joined us, could you get him back there at some point in time? Well, for now, that's the win that's available to you. And as someone who obviously would love to see Georgia win a recruiting battle like this, you better believe that I like Georgia's chances so much more if you get a guy like this back on campus. And if I was Florida State desperately trying to hold on to this, or if I was another suitor and kind of, hoping I could elbow my way into it, Wiley on the Georgia campus, I think, should be taken as a real troubling sign for any would-be competitor here, because we know how well they do when they have these game day opportunities to make impressions on players, whether it be Wiley or KJ Bolden a year ago, or frankly anybody else.
Yeah, Brandon, speaking of impressions, I mean, I've been doing this for a minute. I guess I'm going to just chalk CJ as kind of a wild card. He's not going to do everything textbook. Like, we can't read the signs and we can't see some of the normal values. And, hey, this feels like this might happen. I don't know if this will apply to CJ, because he's kind of just does things his own way. I mean, the thing I'll come back to, Brandon, is CJ was highly prioritized by Georgia during this recruiting phase. He saw the best of Georgia. Georgia recruited him heavy. They had all their alpha recruiters on him, and he just chose Florida State. And he said that came back to Florida State a long time. Just the initial first feelings he had at Florida State, liked Florida State better, felt it was a better fit. Now, of course, that might be code words for something else. Let's not have our head too high up too low in the sand, not to be able to read what the new world order is kind of all about these days. But with CJ, I mean, this is a guy, to me, he's always right now seem more concerned with his senior season because he knows all this stuff will be there in December. And I do agree with you. CJ takes a visit to Georgia. That will only help Georgia's chances here. But, there's other schools that are going to try and pull him away from Florida State as well. And there's other schools that are going to show track record and production of passing game, feeding big play receivers and the like as well.
Who might we see attend the Georgia game from a recruiting standpoint on Saturday?
Yeah, Brandon, this is kind of interesting. It's a weekend where, you've got, this is the only home game in September, and I think that means a lot. You're going to see, I think the biggest name that's told me he's likely coming is Ousmane Kromah. He's expected. He's told me he's going to make his decision sometime this month. Of course, as you probably well know, and a lot of our readers and viewers might know, that Ousmane just took a big visit to Auburn this past weekend, and that prompted some forecasts. That prompted some crystal ball traffic in the direction of Auburn there. So I think what Ousmane's doing right now is he is circling the bases, kind of trying to cross all the T's and dot all the I's before he makes his decision. He told me he'd like to get it done this month. And Brendan, if it does become Auburn would have kind of came out of nowhere. That was the school that was kind of lost with him and his mother for the longest time. And Hugh Freeze and that staff has certainly rebuilt a bridge to get to Ousmane Kromah. Honesty, Brendan, compels me to admit here that this is a recruit that I feel like Georgia has kind of not been all cards on the table, like full force. I don't think Georgia has ever kind of went both double barrel recruiting here with Ousmane Kromah. I think there's certain people in the building that like him, and there's certain people in the building that really, really love him. And I don't know if that's always been uniform for Ousmane when he goes to Georgia.
Yeah, I will agree with that. I've been watching him now for a long time. He was a very productive player, even as a freshman for Lee County. So he's been on the scene in Georgia for quite some time. And the recruiting hysteria around Kromah, for whatever reason, has just never quite matched the performance on the field. And I think he's going to be a good player wherever he goes. And, I think obviously there are a lot of Georgia fans, especially those down there in Leesburg, who would love to see a guy like Kromah end up at UGA. And for whatever reason, this has always been one of those things where the recruitment on Kromah has just been a little different than you kind of expected to be. A guy who makes a lot of noise on the field. Every time we've had him on TV, he's been incredibly productive. But the overall, hysteria around his recruitment has never, for whatever reason, quite matched that, either because he himself has chosen to be quiet or just because, whatever the reason is. It's just never quite been as hysterical of a recruitment as his on-field production for all these years would have suggested.
Yeah, Brendan, I think it's a lot of things. I think it's, first of all, really nice young man, engaging young man, really, really impressive family. He really wants to make it big for his mother, to take care of his mom. He's a great interview, great kid to talk to, but there's just always something there, whether maybe it's the fit with Georgia. Georgia's got a couple of body types quite like him, and they're looking for more of that, Nate Frazier type, that James Cook type in this class. And the thing with Kromah, he's gotten a lot of carries. He's been extremely productive. He's actually better out of the backfield than most might think. And Brandon, this is a quality back. I think you and I both agree on that. That I bet if he lined up and he got 12 carries against Tennessee Tech on Saturday, he'd probably end up with 70 or 85, 90 yards against running behind the Georgia offensive line. He's the type of back that can be productive at Georgia. But I can't help but think Georgia sometimes might look at their backfield and think, well, similar skill set to Chauncey Bowens now, similar skill set to Roderick Robinson, who's still healing. We might not see him until November. And then also Branson Robinson. So, they always try to have more diversity in the backfield. And I know Georgia wants to go after 2 primo backs in 2026. And maybe this might be the class where they just take one after they took 3 last cycle.
Yeah, I guess the point that I'm sort of building to here is that when Georgia had Dale McGee as its running backs coach, McGee was like this incredible veteran. He knew the entire state of Georgia like the back of his hand. He was one of those guys that my perception is he just sort of had his own way about making evaluations. And sometimes that lined up with the recruiting rankings, and sometimes it just sort of didn't. And Dale was just sort of going to do what he was going to do when it came to recruiting rankings. It might be a guy from Georgia. It might be a guy from California. It might be a guy from wherever. But Dale was going to do what he was going to do when it comes to running backs. And so now you got a guy like Josh Crawford, who I think a lot of Georgia fans are really happy to have on the staff. Crawford's got amazing ties to South Georgia, including Lee County there as well. but he's obviously a much younger coach. He hasn't been here very long. I mean, the sense that I get is I don't quite know that we know exactly what Crawford is looking for from the running back position as of yet, the way it was just so obvious that, like Del McGee sort of had a type. He was kind of going after that type, and he very frequently got his man when it came to that kind of thing. I think the new priorities for Georgia when it comes to the styles of running backs it's looking for, still a little too early to know some of that, right?
Yeah, it's really clear. I think the type they're looking for now, especially with Bo Walker in the class, is they're looking for that kind of game breaker, lightning bolt type back. And I think they got that in a couple of guys last cycle in Dwight Phillips and especially Nate freaking Frazier. But I think this year's a little delicate. Like I said, I know that we always try to look at the ebbs and flows. And look, Georgia went 3 backs in the 2024 class. They've got 1 committed now, and they've never been in a real big hurry to add the second running back in 2025. And usually that tells you something. And I think Ousmane Croman some years might already be a guy that Georgia would have chiefly pursued. So he's going to make his decision soon, Brandon. I think a lot of the tea leaves now are pointing towards Auburn. Florida State was also a finalist there in his final 3. One thing I do know about Ousmane, though, everywhere he goes, he hears dogs barking about wanting him to join the class.
Sure. Anybody else on the visitor front to mention before we change the subject here?
Yeah, Brandon, it's a really big 2026 class. Lots of the 2026s are going to be there. Maybe they might get a better seat up front. Nasir McCoy is one guy that I'm going to pay a lot of attention to, a safety out of Buford. They call him NASCAR, a really good player. He got offered by Georgia really early on. Coach Brown actually offered him 2 summers ago. So this is going to be a class where this is going to be a weekend where a lot of 2026 guys show up and kind of get that VIP treatment.
I liked your story with Tyler Atkinson, obviously a linebacker that we love from the Grayson program, as important a name as exists for Georgia, I think, at least close to it in the 2026 class. Interesting quotes from him to you at DawgNation.com. Impressed by getting a chance to see those Georgia freshmen playing on Saturday. I think that Kirby tried to downplay the negative recruiting aspect of, this is a place that freshmen can't play. But I said this on the show the other day, that every recruiting battle when you're Georgia sort of boils down to this. Georgia's selling itself as the best, and it's the place that the best ought to want to come. And literally everybody else is sort of selling themselves on, we need you more. Georgia's like, hey, if you want to be the best, you're going to come where all the other best are. And everybody else is, we need you more, therefore we can offer you more. More playing time, more money, more of something. We just need you more than Georgia does. And so when Georgia can get a Frazier or a Bolden, guys like that involved, I guess I'm not too surprised that a guy like Atkinson sees it, because I'm sure they are hearing over and over again of, well, if you go there, look how crowded it is, look how hard it is to play. Even 5 stars are kind of sitting on the bench in some cases. That when you do see some of that on Saturday, more than a dozen freshmen getting in the game for Georgia, I believe it was. When you do see that, I imagine it does probably carry a little bit of weight. And it was interesting to hear Atkinson talk about those things with you.
Brendan, I think Georgia, whether it's reading the room, I think what they're doing right now is excellent on this front. And they're singing a tune right now. And maybe it's, if you're a country guy, it's Chris Stapleton, or maybe if you're a different type of music, maybe it's Luther Vandross back in his day. But Brandon, the tune the Dogs are singing to these alpha prospects is, we're not promising you anything. We're not promising anything but a shot. You come in, you work hard, you do your job. We'll give you a shot to play and play quickly. What you do with that shot is then on you. And Brandon, that really resonates with these alpha prospects like Elijah Griffin, Tyler Atkinson. I think it is pitch perfect in terms of that message that Georgia is giving these elite guys. Brandon, it's almost tantalizing and salivating, like putting a big steak in front of a junkyard dog on a Saturday, man. They really like what Georgia is selling when they say it that way. No promises, bank on your talent, bank on your work ethic, and you can get on that big Georgia stage.
Yeah, really exciting to think about all of that. A Georgia commit got some good news here this week. Bo Walker, who we kind of followed the story with him. He was at Cedar Grove. His coach leaves and goes to Stockbridge, or one of his coaches leaves and goes to Stockbridge. He thinks maybe Stockbridge is a good spot for him. Gets his transfer denied. He appeals it. That gets denied. And it seemed like for a while Walker might lose his his eligibility for a senior season. Well, I guess now we find out he is going to be eligible. Rabun Gap Noguchi, one of the really, hoity-toity, high-dollar private schools up in extreme North Georgia. What's the latest here on Walker kind of finally finding a place to play here?
Brandon, kudos to you for throwing the first Noguchi reference out on the DawgNation Daily bingo card.
That's what it's called, right? It's Rabun Gap Noguchi, right?
Yeah, that's right. I do the common tongue, man. Us lay people, man, we just put Rabun Gap, and that's good to go for us. But, this is interesting. First of all, so happy for Bowden Walker, if you want to get fancy with it. He finally gets his senior season. And Brendan, to me, I don't know I have to say a lot about this to get an amen from you, but the senior high school football season is special. Yeah. High school football is special. And I don't care if he goes on and becomes a Super Bowl MVP. To have not had a senior season of high school football, I think, is a tragedy. This was the SHA looked at that move and said this was the old follow the coach rule. Can't do that. Not a bona fide move, even if he enrolled prior to the official naming of the head coach. He was the former offensive coordinator at Cedar Grove, where he starred and won a couple of state championships with those mighty Saints. And Brandon, he's with Rabun Gap, and you want to talk about a barnstorming team.
Yeah.
Let's think about the Rabun Gap schedule. So they'll play David Sanders Jr. in Providence Day in North Carolina. They've already played Benedictine out of Savannah. They will also play John Curtis out of Louisiana tonight. That will be his first game against the Louisiana power, John Curtis Christian. So he's getting around. He's going around a lot of places, but he's landed at Rabun Gap. Brandon, that's a place with a lot of boarding school folks from overseas, some European players, some players that may be too old or not eligible in other classifications. And here's the kicker. They're located in beautiful Northeast Georgia, kind of in Gunner Stockton territory right there, Charlie Warner territory. But they play in the North Carolina Independent Schools Scholastic Association, something like that. So Bo Walker, Georgia commit, who has 2 Georgia state titles, will be playing high school football in Georgia for a North Carolina state championship this fall.
Yeah, so I think that's really cool. I mean, in a lot of ways, they're sort of the IMG of Georgia. Now, people think about other programs, perhaps maybe having more recruits, but hey, Rabun Gap's adding a lot more recruits. And as you said, they're essentially playing a national schedule. They don't play a, sort of region schedule in Georgia. I guess they're playing, their region, I guess, is more like North Carolina private school teams, things like that. It's probably, the most unique, use bad grammar here, the most unique team in Georgia in terms of international players. Some of these kids I think are pretty old. They're playing, these national programs. It's a very interesting program, Rabun Gap is, so I'm glad to find that Walker was willing to sort of use anything at his disposal to be able to get that done.
Feels like a teaser trailer for him for college football, really, Brandon, when you look at it.
All right, I want to get one more final thought from you here coming up in a moment. Let me also remind you, though, about one of the great companies that we have a part of our DawgNation Game Day coverage here this year. It's our friends at Lassiter Tractor. And if you're in the South Georgia area, I want you to keep Lassiter Tractor in mind because they're the place you go to for John Deere equipment. Since 1956, that's been the case. They can give you a great deal on a compact utility tractor package, that great, unmistakable John Deere green. They can get all of that for you there, including the John Deere Series 1 tractors. If you've got like an acre up to 5 acres of land, that might be a great thing for you. It's easy to store, pretty easy to maneuver around with. Or a little bit bigger type of situation. How about the John Deere Series 2 tractor? Yeah, that's like, 10, 15 acres, something along those lines. You're working with livestock, like a true sort of like agricultural type of situation. That might be a great one for you. The Series 3 tractors from John Deere, this is for like the big tracts of land, 15, 20 acres. Of course, super versatile there as well. Even get the Series 4 there as well. All kinds of great equipment from John Deere, from our folks there at Lassiter Tractor. When you think about Lassiter Tractor, I want you to think about John Deere. And if you want to get the attachments to go with that, like the loader bucket, the rotary cutter, so much more, you can get all of that from our friends at Lassiter Tractor. I want you to find them online. It's LassiterREQ.com. Lassiter is spelled Lasseter. LassiterREQ.com. Our folks from Lassiter Tractor, a big part of what we're going to do on game days all year long, and give them a shout out today here on DawgNation Daily there as well. All right, Jeff, quick wrap up before we're done here. Give me one more just sort of thought on the current landscape for Georgia recruiting. Like, what is next? Visitors on Saturday, wish list for possible flips, things along those lines. Not too soon to start thinking 2026, but if I were to ask you, what else is on your mind that maybe I didn't ask you about here, just to sort of wrap up our time here today.
Brandon, first of all, it just feels right to see a tractor company. We should be talking about Dontrell Glover or Mason Short road hogging people out of the way there. But I'm glad you asked me for an open-ended one. I want people to imagine Travion Scott maybe with an Indiana Jones hat and a bullwhip on right now, because he is on a quest to get not just one, not just two, but three defensive tackles. Of course, Elijah Griffin and Justice Terry are two of those. But Brandon, if you're paying attention like I do this week, he's on a quest. He's offered, I think, listen to this, names from the past. Seven Cloud, former JUCO player, former Georgia commitment out of McEachern.
By the way, great to have him back in our lives again. That was a guy that sort of popped up on the scene, a year or two ago and sort of seemed to disappear as quickly as he showed up. So nice to see Seven Cloud sticking with it and still being a part of the Georgia recruiting picture.
Yeah, one-time Georgia commitment, had to go a different path. Grades, eligibility, had to go JUCO. I don't know if there was ever really an official decommitment from Seven Cloud. We could call him committed still probably, because he's still he never really official had public decommitment, even though his recruiting class signed. But there's Christian Ingram, Brandon, a young man at Newton High School who just interesting case, Brandon, 6'6", 290, 7-inch wingspan. Freshman year, he played football. Sophomore year, he didn't. Junior year, he just started playing right before the season. Didn't start. Finally starting this year for Newton. Georgia just offered him. Trey Scott said he was going to come after him if he developed the way he did, and he did. Man, Georgia also offered another young man, Jamari Medlock out of Charles Drew, just this week, Brandon. So it's very rare and very different to see Georgia offering these big mammoth defensive tackles in the state of Georgia. Brandon, in a lot of cases, Georgia here is the first SEC offer. In the instance of Christian Ingram, Brandon, he had a Connecticut offer all summer, and then Georgia offers, and then all of a sudden Georgia State is offered and other schools are starting to pop in. Georgia's kind of the starter offer, big offer for a lot of these young men in the state. And Brandon, we'd also be remiss if we didn't highlight the fact that Elijah Griffin, number one top target on the board, been that way ever since the David Sanders Jr. ship has sailed. He has set his official visit for the October 11th, 12th, 13th weekend. That's his birthday weekend. Yeah. He'll be in Athens for that game. And obviously, Brandon, you're going to see some of those bigger official visits come in the month of October. That's when Chase Linton has told me as well. So I would say the month of September with just one home game is a prelude, but then you're going to get bigger SEC home games in October, and that's when all the recruiting juice will happen for visits with the class of 2025.
Good notes to wrap it up, Jeff. Appreciate your time here today. I'll see you in Athens on Saturday. Great stuff from you all day long, and of course, stopping by our DawgNation postgame show there as well. Jeff, appreciate that. I will read plenty from you at DawgNation.com, and then back here again this same time next week on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We'll look forward to talking to you then.
Take it easy, BA. See you in the Classic City tomorrow.
Looking forward to it.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
By the way, speaking of that, busy game day for DawgNation tomorrow. Pre-game coverage begins at noon tomorrow. Our Kaylee Manziel will anchor all of that. Davin Bellamy, the former Dawg, you'll get him both pre-game and post-game with us. We're looking forward to all of that. A lot from Jeff Sentell there as well. Of course, me, home away from home, back once again for our DawgNation post-game show at the UGA bookstore tomorrow. That is exciting stuff. And speaking of Kaylee, go back and rewatch yesterday's edition of DawgNation at Large with her and Connor Riley. If you missed it, some really fun stuff. What has become a great Thursday night staple. 7 p.m. now, sort of a consistent starting time for all of our evening shows. They're on the DawgNation video channels. But if you want to go back and rewatch it, most of you, that's how most of you consume this stuff anyway. That is there for you. Up on the DawgNation YouTube page right now, the show from last night with Kaylee and Connor. Now, we're cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And, boy, so excited about everything that Royal Caribbean's got in store for you, including Utopia of the Seas. And you hear me talk about it all the time. And the one thing you need to know about Utopia is that every single one of those Utopia sailings, all of the itineraries, every single one of them take you to Perfect Day Coco Cay. And this, to me, is still the thing that makes Utopia of the Seas different than, and Royal Caribbean different than any other ship that's out there, is the fact that all of them are going to Perfect Day Coco Cay. That it's just the thing that makes Royal Caribbean different. That private island oasis there in the Bahamas, the wonderful experience. You can take advantage of all the great things that Utopia's got on board for you there as well. But that stopover at Perfect Day Coke, okay, that really is the differentiator. That really is the thing that makes Royal Caribbean, I think, better than anybody else who plays in that space. And Jessica Slater can tell you more about it. Great travel agent, specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean. Give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. Or email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She can get you set up and ready to go. Let me give you a couple of thoughts here. We're going to kind of look at games for the upcoming weekend. I will tell you this, nothing from me on Tennessee, NC State right now, but during our R.S. Andrews cool down, at the conclusion of today's show, we'll give you a little taste of the entire Dawg Nation team. You'll hear from Mike, you'll hear from Connor, you'll hear from Jeff, you'll hear from Kaylee, our buddy Dari Payro from R.S. Andrews. We'll give you our official pick on that, plus our best bets for the weekend. All of that leading you into Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews, which debuts at noon today on the Dawg Nation video channel. So nothing on the Vols here right now, although I think I've kind of given you a little bit of a hint about the way that I feel about that. Instead, let me just talk about two games here for right now. Piggybacking on something I already said. I think South Carolina, Kentucky's fascinating. Georgia doesn't play South Carolina this year, but I'm still a little bit intrigued by the Gamecocks, who did not take a step forward in 2023 after showing some real strides in 2022. Y'all, their offense may just be bad. And we kind of said, boy, if your big quarterback transfers Robbie Ashford and you're kind of thinking about Lenore Sellers as your starter, man, you may have some real issues at the quarterback position. Against Old Dominion last week seemed like that was true. I still think you can find a big role for Rocket Sanders. You might can shorten games. You might can limit possessions. You might have a chance to do something. Defensively, there may be some stuff to recommend here. Dylan Stewart as a pass rusher, he may be pretty good. Is there any life left in South Carolina? Is there any opportunity here to keep it closer against Kentucky? There's a little bit of an interesting rivalry at times between Stoops and Beamer. That's been kind of a fun one in the past. Watching South Carolina on Saturday trying to kind of play a little better than they did last week against Old Dominion is fascinating. But the Georgia side of this is it's all eyes on Kentucky, because that's Georgia's opponent to open its SEC slate next week. And as I said, we'll do plenty more on this next week, but Georgia going into an off week, so many of these games seem to happen against Kentucky. That's typically not Georgia at its best. Georgia's typically thinking about rest going into a game like this. And the point spread data tells the story. They don't typically cover spreads in games going into an off week, which means next week against Kentucky, it has a chance to be closer than experts think. Now, does that turn into a situation where a dangerous Kentucky team has a chance to win it? Well, obviously, based on how the Wildcats play on Saturday, we'll have more information on that. They stand right now as about a 10.5-point favorite. Everything in my gut wants to be contrarian here and says, South Carolina probably keeps it closer. But the truth is, and I'll talk more about this on Go With The Flow later on today, the truth is that this just may be a situation where Kentucky has the firepower at quarterback with Brock Vandagriff to give a strong performance at home. Maybe that's what they're capable of doing. Either way, I think the Georgia fans are going to be watching pretty closely to see how Kentucky and South Carolina plays out as a precursor to what might come after that. And then I want to talk about the Texas-Michigan game here for a moment, too. And this is obviously the big game on Saturday. But as it gets closer, to me, the game gets bigger and bigger in my mind. I want to give you kind of a simple reason why this is. Anytime there's a prestigious game, the game that feels big because of the prestige of the teams that are playing it. And there are really two reasons to establish prestige as a team. You either get there because of your performance or you get there because of your popularity. In the case of Michigan, they're obviously a very popular team, but their prestige in this game is based on performance. One way or another, no matter how they got there, the fact is they get the belt. They are the reigning national champs in college football. On the flip side, Texas prestige coming into a game like this is almost solely based on popularity. They are the biggest school in one of the biggest states. Texas has a gigantic fan base. Not the most rabid, a little wine and cheese, but nonetheless a gigantic fan base. So when you've got what feels like a big game with two prestigious teams, here is the adage I kind of live by. The team that comes in riding the steam of popularity, you got to be really careful making sure they're not overrated coming to a game like this. Odds makers have Texas favored in excess of a touchdown, 7.5 points. Texas being favored on the road against a top 10 team is a pretty unfamiliar spot. I want to give you a couple of notes here just real quick. Chris Felica, going back for Tech, this is the Bear from Fox Sports, 2009, he says, beginning with the 2009 BCS championship, Texas has faced 29 top 10 opponents. It's been favored in just 3 of them. Not only has Texas failed to cover those 3, it also lost all 3 outright, including last year's college football playoff semifinal against Washington. And he goes on to give you a couple other notes there. The overall point here is this, is that are you sure you like Texas on the road favored against another top 10 team? History would suggest that's a problem. But to me, this also feels like a moment much like Clemson had a few years ago when we finally had to say, okay, well, Clemsoning no longer exists. The old idea that Clemson loses games it's supposed to win. Dabo Swinney talked a lot about that at the time. Eventually, Clemson just graduated past that. I think Saturday could be a day as well for Texas to graduate past this idea of Texas is back and the sort of mocking tone we use for stuff like that. Maybe tomorrow is truly their day to prove they belong on the scene. Or maybe it's a repeat of the same history we've seen play out over and over again. We'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And before we roll into a long drink, long finish, let me also remind you about our friends at Atlanta Sports Trips. First of all, what a great job they did last week with our DawgNation Invasion. So many folks there, so many folks having a great time. And our buddy Matt Chernoff was also with us on the air last week. We were talking about the fact that, listen, not only when it comes to Atlanta Sports Trips do you get the great DawgNation Invasion events here this year, but they've also got great things going on as well when it comes to other exciting events for other teams like those in Atlanta, including the Atlanta Falcons here. So you get all of that going on with our folks from Atlanta Sports Trips here this year, including a wonderful trip out to see the Falcons in Las Vegas against the Raiders, which includes a welcome party, a VIP Q&A with former Falcon Jamal Anderson, the originator of the Dirty Bird. All kinds of cool stuff going on there on that. You can check that out, atlsportstrips.com. That's atlsportstrips.com. And while I got your attention on that, also check out DawgNation.com/tailgate because our friends at Atlanta Sports Trips also got you ready for the big DawgNation invasion to Tuscaloosa coming up very soon as well. So we had a great time last week. We're going to have more fun coming up here in a couple of weeks there in Tuscaloosa. We want to see you a part of it. So DawgNation.com/tailgate for that. Or if you want to join our friends at Atlanta Sports Trips for their big trip to Vegas coming up later on this year too, atlsportstrips.com for more on that. All right, now we're going to roll into our long drink, long finish. And as promised, great guest here coming up. He'll call the game for ESPN Plus on Saturday. It's the analyst, Rocky Boiman, here today on DawgNation Daily. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, happy to welcome in a special guest today, 8-year NFL vet, former linebacker for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish there as well, but perhaps most importantly, a guy who'll have the call on Saturday for the Georgia Bulldogs against Tennessee Tech. It's Rocky Boiman joining us here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Rocky, thanks so much for your time. Looking forward to having you back in Athens again on Saturday and getting a chance to see Georgia in its home opener.
Boy, sir, I'm really excited about it, Brandon, and thanks for having me here. It's been a few years since I've been down to Athens and done a game, so can't wait, man.
Well, I'm always kind of curious to get the perspective of someone like you who's calling the game because you get a chance to watch the film. You're watching, obviously, pretty closely. When you have been looking at Georgia in preparation for what you expect to see on Saturday, what stands out to you from obviously a pretty impressive performance in handling Clemson this past weekend?
I'll give you one for each side of the ball. I think number one, the first thing that jumped out to me was Carson Beck. I had not had a chance yet to really, until this week, to really scrutinize his game and watch him, and I thought he was just phenomenal. I mean, his ability to get the ball out of his hand, to know where it's supposed to go and get it out of his hand without the hesitation is very, very impressive. It's hard to blitz him because he gets it out so quick, and just doing this, Brandon, I come across seemingly every week. There's some program, big or small, has a quarterback, and he's 6'4", and he's 230. He's got a great arm, and he knows the offense according to the coach, and this and that. But you see varying levels of play, and a lot of times a guy that you're like, why doesn't it work for this guy? What's the disconnect here? Why is he not performing great when he has all the attributes? And it's just a combination of it factor and, again, that quick processing of information. I was very impressed with Carson Beck there. And then on defense, it's just, I guess, getting an opportunity to see a defense that is that deep. I think I wrote down 21 defenders had a stat. Now, of course, the two deep that they give us has like 37 guys on it, but 21 guys last week had a stat. So they had a tackle, they had a pass breakup, had a something to that. So to see that kind of come out in a big game early in the season against Clemson, but both those things really impressed me.
So you're obviously doing the radio every day in WLW, a big radio station there in Cincinnati. So a lot of Buckeyes fans in your audience. And I guess I know we're early into this thing here, but it's an expanded playoff this year. It's kind of a fascinating landscape because both the SEC and the Big Ten are bigger. I mean, do you get an early sense of how you think that Georgia kind of fits into not just the playoff picture, because I think most Georgia fans sort of expect the Dogs to be obviously a chance to make that 12-team playoff, but sort of the competition around UGA to maybe be best team in the country here once again? What's your early read on how that is likely to play out over the course of the next few weeks?
Yeah, I mean, even before last week, Brandon, I had kind of a toss-up between Georgia and Ohio State as number one team. I think it's easier to say Georgia right now because they played a formidable opponent in Clemson, where Ohio State did not. But I still think Ohio State has a great roster to the tune of $21 million, according to their AD. So
that's right.
That money talks, man. It's the Jimmies and the Joes. But no, I think, offensively, I just was really impressed with what Georgia has. And we know they're going to have the guys in the trenches. We know they're going to have the depth on the O-line and specifically the D-line. So I think right now, early in the season, getting a true test week one, Georgia's at the top.
Is there anything about Tennessee Tech that's different than maybe the Georgia fan who feels like he's seen this kind of game a million times before? I know they kind of played close last week with Middle Tennessee State, I guess. But is there anything that you've noticed about Tennessee Tech that you would say, if you're a Georgia fan, maybe you'll pay a little extra attention to this coming into this game on Saturday?
I wish I could say there was. I mean, this is a game I think Georgia is going to handle. Look, they got guys that can, that are getting paid a little bit of money here and there. So they got guys that can make some plays. I think it's going to be a question of, how does Tennessee Tech want to attack this game? You know what I mean? Like, do they want to go down there and try to go after it and risk getting some guys hurt? My sense is, they may want to try to dial this thing back in there, put a good performance on, try to put some good things on tape, but not necessarily, put their entire season at jeopardy.
So along those lines, we'll kind of finish with this in that, look, Kirby Smart over the years has not really kind of sugarcoated this. It's sort of hard to tell that he really thinks, oh, man, these games are great. He says it's great for the teams themselves because obviously for a program like Tennessee Tech, they'll fund a lot of their season by the money they make by playing Georgia. But we also live in a world in which everything around college football seems to change. And the future of games like this, Power 4 versus FCS, it's not necessarily guaranteed. Like, how much more into the future do you see games like this still being played in college football?
Well, it's tough because, you look at some of the scores of these games and they are a lot to a little, right? This past weekend, I did Ole Miss Furman, and what was that score?
70 something, track. Right?
76.
Yes.
76 to nothing. Lane Kiffin denied the running clock in 10-minute quarters in the second half, by the way, which, I think coaches always find a way. They're going to do what's best for their team. And I did not, I think that Lane Kiffin made a bad decision at all. He's got guys, he's got to get ready, and this is an opportunity to get his backup quarterback some work and get his fifth running back some work. So I think Kirby will do the same. He's not going to just say, all right, we're going to roll our helmets out there and let's think about that. No, he's going to use every opportunity he can to get guys some work, maybe get some more work on the depth, which is always important in the SEC, as you know. So now the future of these games, I don't know. Maybe I don't mean, to your point, how does some of these schools even go on without the payday? Yeah. But the gap is getting wider, as you know, with the transfer portal and NIL, and I think it's going to continue to go that way. So I think the future of that remains to be told.
Well, before we say goodbye to you, a lot of folks may remember your football career. They see you on TV on a regular basis calling games. They may not realize this. You're also an author there as well. Rocky's Rules is a book that you've written that I think touches on things more than just football. What was the process like of, I guess, becoming an author, and what message did you want to convey with the written word there?
Oh, Brian, I appreciate that. Yeah, I wrote that book back in 2020. It's called Rocky's Rules, and it's my 11 rules for life, and it's really things I learned mostly the hard way in my college and NFL playing days, and just certain things that happened and through some stories, just some good life lessons, preparing one day your chance will come and, remind the details, just certain things like that I think were good. And it's a book that I would read, Brandon, because it's only about 85 pages. It gets right to the point, you know what I'm saying? And I think it's one of the prouder things I've done in my life. So I appreciate you getting me an opportunity to plug that thing, man.
Well, I'm glad to have stuff like that out there, because one of the things we talk about a lot is that football is obviously a great form of entertainment. It's probably for many of us our favorite pastime, watching these football games each week. But so much more than that for the players who play it, or even the lessons you get sometimes just from watching it. I mean, it really is a real reminder of kind of what it takes to succeed in all walks of life, right?
Brandon, you nailed it. I give speeches all the time to businesses and to teams I coach, youth teams and stuff. Football is the greatest teacher of the life lessons out there. I mean, you literally got to know how to get up when you get knocked down, right? You literally got to understand sacrifice. You got to understand the fact that you can do everything right in life, and sometimes, but look, that day, that team happened to be better, and you can't go in the tank over it. So it's just, that's the reason you play it. Football is, as a guy who played in the NFL and won a Super Bowl and played 8 years and all that, football has given me a lot from that perspective. But the biggest thing it's given me is just, it's kind of put my life, the influence of it on a pathway to be able to have some success through the lessons it's taught. So it's the greatest game. If this country, Brandon, were run by football people, yeah, I think we'd be in a much better spot right now. And so that's why I really enjoy being a part of it still.
Amen to that, for sure. So if people want to find out more of you online, the book, everything else you've got going on, how can they find you online, Rocky?
Yeah, you can just check me out on Twitter at RockyBoiman50, and then my website, therockyboiman.com. And then, yeah, check me out on the broadcast alongside Jay Alter this week down there in Athens. And, man, we are so excited to get down there tomorrow and meet with the staff and get this thing going.
We're looking forward to having you down here. Hope you enjoy your time there. And obviously, we'd love to have you back on the show at some point in time, too. Thanks for your time here today.
Would love to, Brandon. Thank you.
So really good stuff from Rocky Boiman. Interesting insight somebody like that has, because he's watching more film. He's talking to sources. He'll be meeting with the Georgia coaching staff. You get some interesting insight into that viewpoint of kind of under the hood a little bit when it comes to Georgia Bulldogs. And if you're watching tomorrow on SEC Network Plus, ESPN Plus, you'll see Rocky Boiman on the call for the game. We appreciate him let me try that again. We appreciate his time as a part of our long drink, long finish here today. And we appreciate all of you who make the long drink a big part of your game day. Obviously, right there in the cooler, so tasty this time of year. When the weather's nice and you're outside, there is nothing that goes with a tailgate like our friends at the Finish Long Drink. Whether it's the Long Drink Cranberry, the Long Drink Strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume, Long Drink Zero, that's no carbs, no sugar. My favorite still, the traditional in the blue can, the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick. Of course, you got the pineapple flavor that's out there for limited time. You got the peach flavor that's out there. People are enjoying all that too. Whatever one you want to go with, great time to do that. Heading towards a big tailgate time of year online, thelongdrink.com. You can hear the whole story, find out all about how the Finish Long Drink got to America here in Georgia and why it's such a big part of all kinds of folks in our Dog Nation audience. Make sure you check that out today. It is a Friday tradition for us. We call it kind of a Friday shoes dump, where we give you a bunch of golden shoes going into the weekend. I'm probably a little bit behind on some really good submissions, but I'm going to try to make good on a bunch of these here right now. A lot of folks also now submitting these via email, which is kind of a fun thing. So let's throw the first one up on the screen here, and we'll give a shout out. First of all, Kevin writing in. We've made a lot of fun of Billy Napier here this week for some of the stuff that's gone on with him. Kevin saying, Sunbelt Billy gave me a new CFB 25 goal. That's the video game. Create a rural Central Florida university, the Fighting Basement Dwellers, and lead them to a natty. Recruiting in Florida is going to be on lockdown. Kevin, that is very funny stuff and a great idea, and certainly golden shoe worthy for you on that. Next golden shoe, also going out, once again, making fun of Billy Napier and the water bottle that we've debuted this week. George on Tap says how it started with the pill bottle that's Billy proof that he can't get open, to now how it's going. He can't even open the water bottle either. Just really trying to get that thing and not quite able to do it. George on Tap, very funny from you. Once again, we'll give you a golden shoe for that there as well. How about our next golden shoe to give out here today? The great Celicia Gagnon weighing in. She says, that moment you hear there's a GoFundMe amongst Florida fans to buy out old Sunbelt Billy. She says, cheers, enjoying some Finnish long drink. I see what looks to be a cranberry there, what looks to be a traditional there. Celicia having a good time with all of that. We love her. So hashtag Finnish long drink, hashtag golden shoe. Celicia, that's well done. And we're all cheersing and toasting to the misery of the Florida Gators right now. That is very good stuff. Our next golden shoe going here. How about Darian Davis, who is a senior chief petty officer in the United States Navy, part of our comment section, and he mentioned the other day that he was going to be going to Pebble Beach. And I said, well, please share us a photo of that. And so he wrote into me on email, say, good evening, Brandon. This is Darian Davis, subscriber of DawgNation Daily and active duty military stationed in San Diego. I'm sharing with you the Pebble Beach picture. Thanks again, and God bless. You talk about one of God's most gorgeous creations. What is that, the 17-mile drive there, the Monterey Peninsula? I mean, can you just believe that you play golf against that? Now, obviously, I wouldn't play golf very well there, but what an amazing thing. And how cool is it for me to know people like Darian Davis in our comment section, distinguished members of our armed services stationed in San Diego. Just really appreciate you being a part of the show and the great photo from Pebble Beach. We will certainly live vicariously through you on that. Next golden shoe coming here there as well. About this. A guy writes in an email to say, I'm Junkyard Thag, caveman frozen for 2 million years, thawed in 1993. He also lives in Tuscaloosa. He says, not to ramble, but if you can find in your heart to award me a golden shoe, it might warm my 2 million plus year old frozen heart just enough to put up with these bald mammoths until September 28th. So to Junkyard Thag and all the dog fans living in enemy territory, we will give you all golden shoes. Of course, we appreciate Junkyard weighing in there on that. We'll see you in Tuscaloosa here coming up in just a few weeks. Another golden shoe now going out. How about this one? Speaking of San Diego, big watch party here. Some folks wrote in on email on this. Big watch party there last week in San Diego, 9 a.m. start. But how about that great-looking group of Georgia fans there watching in a beautiful place like San Diego? So much fun to see that. So happy when y'all share stuff like this with me. Love knowing that Dog Nation's spreading out far and wide and Georgia fans are having a great time. Even in a beautiful place like San Diego, Georgia fans in full representation there and enjoying that win against the Clemson Tigers. That's the last one, correct? That's right? Is that the last one? Yeah, that's the last one. So good golden shoes today. Thanks so much for that. And our lousy, stinking Gators, about 1,399 days. That's how long it's been since they have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs, and we'll keep laughing at that. Enjoy the game. We'll see you throughout the game tomorrow across all video platforms. Back here Monday, DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. We will talk to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs, they're always taking good care of you on stuff like that. Long show for us, but we're glad that you're all a part of it. We'll get your comments. We'll also give you an official pick here coming up for Tennessee and NC State. We are just all over everything, jamming as much into a game day pre-show as we possibly can. Let us see what's going on in here on the I happen to be on YouTube, so I'll start there right now. Spencer Clark says that Napier might not be too marketable anymore. Maybe not for Florida fans, but for us, the marketing opportunities are just beginning. We had the great water bottle yesterday that we kind of unveiled. We had some fun with that. Great reaction to that online. A lot of terrific golden shoes as it related to that here today. So our ability to, and I put air quotes around market, our ability to sort of market around Napier may just be getting started here. Let's see what else. Spencer Clark makes a comparison between Carson Beck and Peyton Manning. That's certainly an interesting one. I think a lot of us who are Georgia fans sort of hope the career for Beck at Georgia finishes better than the Manning career at Florida did. No Heisman, no national championship. Obviously, those of us who are Georgia fans are perhaps hoping for more than that from Beck, although we clearly acknowledge that Peyton's one of the all-time greats. Dave Snow says one of my good friends is an admiral in the SEALs, and he says we seem to cross paths and know many of the same friends. That's really interesting. That's really interesting. Very interesting. Yes, so some good stuff in here. Dave Snow also said he had to buy some more luggage today, Had final meeting with 20 folks, 7 generals. They all thanked me for helping them and gave me gifts. Now, got a big frame pick, a couple of wooden carvings and plaques. So much for traveling light. Well, I guess that's part of the international thing, right? You probably have just all kinds of stuff coming here and there. Let's see what else. Yeah, a lot of stuff in here. Some of you are laughing at me living out in the rural part of Georgia now. Listen, that's where I belong. That's where I belong. No big city for me. Gerald Harmon says, good show, go Dogs. Appreciate that, Gerald. Thank you so much. Good to see Duran Willis in the comment section here today. He says, any updates on the injured Dogs? Duran, great to see you in here. So I think there's a really good chance that Janelle Aguero plays. I think it's obviously, unlikely that Warren Brinson plays. Mikael Williams won't play. Not an injury. I assume that Trevor Etienne's probably going to play, although all that's been kind of weird. But I assume that Etienne's probably going to play. What else? Any other big one that I'm leaving off there? Yes on Aguero, no on Mikael, probably no on Brinson. I'd say probably yes on Etienne, not injury related, obviously. Am I leaving off a big one? Am I forgetting somebody big there on that? But that's sort of where I think that probably is. A couple more before we can make our pick for Tennessee, NC State. Scott Ayers says his son kicks for Loganville. Said last night they're wearing Appalachia A logos in the back of their helmets. Yeah, I think you're going to see a lot of this across high school football tonight because, and I said this yesterday, obviously 4 lives were lost, but admittedly there is a little bit of I think an extra connection for those of us who are part of high school football. And in fact, I talked to both of our coaches for our game tonight on the Peachtree Sports Network, and they both felt a real personal connection. This Connor Foster, the great coach at Loganville, that's what we were just talking about, Loganville. The great coach at Cartersville, he said, as he was coming up as a coach, he spent 7 years working in Appalachia. I didn't remember that, or I didn't know that. But Connor Foster, the Cartersville coach, worked at Appalachia. Obviously, Coach Aspinwall, who was shot, he was a player at Rome, and there's a member of the Calhoun staff that coached him, at Rome, a part of his coaching staff there. So I think a lot of people around the Georgia high school football community feel a lot of connection to this. So there'll be and I know we'll do our part on the broadcast here tonight and try to pay, proper respects. But across the state of Georgia, no doubt that will be a big part of what goes on tonight. Absolutely, that's the case. How about this? Rambo says that where Jefferson, and Jefferson has a really cool logo with the J and the kind of stuff sort of spread around that they're actually putting an A on their field instead of the J tonight. That kind of gives me chills to think about that. It does. And it's one of those deals where obviously tragedies like this are unspeakable. We actually talked as a family about this. I think I told y'all this yesterday that, because of the proximity to this, we didn't really feel like we could avoid this with our kids. We had to sort of take this head on, and they're pretty afraid, as you might imagine they would be. Everyone is. And that's one of the things that we talked about, that in the aftermath of this, as terrible as it is, and you can't do anything to water down the terrible nature of it, 2 things that you see. You see heroes, school resource officers, for instance. Read the story about how they stepped in on this. Police that quickly, go to the scene. The medical staffs of the various hospitals treating these folks. You see heroes emerge almost right away. And you do see a spirit of connection that is unmistakable. And look, if you get too into the media part of it, you probably see a little bit more of some of the divisiveness and things like that. But if you're on the ground, and I've been pretty close to that this week, if you're on the ground, you see a remarkable spirit of connection, and it continues with high school football all across our state tonight. Don't think you can, lose sight of that. That in the midst of terrible tragedy, there is still some beauty to observe. It doesn't make the tragedy any less horrible, but it does give us perhaps the energy we need to find the courage to maybe keep going. At least that's what I'd like to believe anyway. We'll get more of your comments here in a moment on what has turned out to be kind of a long one. But obviously the R.S. Andrews cool down is a precursor to our Go with the Flow presented by R.S. Andrews later on today. We get a chance to make all of our picks for the big games here this weekend. We save one, though, to do with you here on Fridays to give you a little bit of a taste of what that's all about. I think it's a fascinating game in Charlotte for Saturday. Tennessee trying to prove what they're all about here this season. So for now, let's find out what Mike Griffith, Jeff Sentell, Connor Riley, Kaylee Manziel, Dari Payro, and little old me have to say about Tennessee, NC State, and some best bets for the week. You'll see more of this on Go with the Flow, but for now, as a part of our R.S. Andrews cool down, here's our official picks for Tennessee and NC State. Hey, DawgNation Daily viewers. Obviously, we appreciate you being a part of our R.S. Andrews Go with the Flow each and every day here on DawgNation Daily, and we hope you'll join us as well for Go with the Flow presented by R.S. Andrews every Friday in the DawgNation video channels. It's our thoughts, the entire DawgNation team, Mike, Jeff, Connor, Kaylee, me, and our buddy Dari Payro from R.S. Andrews. We give you thoughts on the big slate of college football action from a point spread perspective. If you've never seen the show, we think you'd like it. And to give you a little bit of an idea of what we'll be doing later on today, thoughts on Georgia and Tennessee Tech, Michigan, Texas. We want to give you some thoughts right now on another interesting game on Saturday involving an SEC team. That is the Tennessee Vols. They are going to Charlotte to take on an ACC foe, the NC State Wolfpack. This game, from a point spread perspective, perhaps a little closer than you think it might be, at least maybe to some, as Tennessee sees itself a 7.5-point favorite going to Charlotte for this particular game. So, Mike Griffith, a lot of love for the Vols after last Saturday, the debut for Nico Iamaleava against Chattanooga. Big numbers for him and a lot of expectations. What do you want to do with Tennessee here as a 7.5-point favorite?
Yeah, that line seems suspiciously low. I mean, Tennessee looks really strong offensively, and Josh Heupel keeps the throttle down. I'm going to take Tennessee and lay the points.
So Tennessee is the pick from Mike Griffith. Jeff Sentell, how about for you?
Interesting game. I think this has the potential with the quarterbacks, Grayson McCall, Nico, of course, to probably be the most entertaining of the weekend. We must make note that it's at a neutral site. As much as I would like to think NC State could beat Tennessee for the first time since 1911, not happening. I will lay those points. Give me the Vols. And the Nico era freight train continues to go down Rocky Top.
So far, one-way street here on Tennessee. Connor, how about for you?
Yeah, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink milk. So give me Tennessee here. I don't feel great about it, but I just think that this is an NC State team. Really struggled to run the ball in week one. I think Tennessee's defense is set up to exploit that.
Maybe a better Tennessee defense than we've seen at any point in time so far in the Josh Heupel era there as well. Kaylee, how about for you? Tennessee, slightly more than a touchdown favorite in Charlotte against NC State.
Yeah, this is tough because I took NC State as one of my dark horse picks for the playoffs, and I might end up paying in pennies for that at some point. But this game doesn't necessarily matter for them to have to get in the playoff. I really like what I saw out of Nico Iamaleava. Since everyone else is way too scared to say the last name, I'll do the honors. I got it. Give me the Vols here.
So Kaylee also on the side of Tennessee there as well. And I have to confess something. I think Tennessee might be pretty good. I really do. I think they are better maybe on paper right now than a handful of SEC teams that are slotted above them in kind of the perceived pecking order, the actual rankings. I think that Tennessee's a more dangerous game for Georgia than, like, say, Ole Miss might be coming up in November. I think there's a lot to recommend about Tennessee here right now. Obviously, when they left the friendly confines of Neyland Stadium last year a couple of times, it did not go well. These were true road games, blown out by Missouri, lost to Florida. But beyond that, this is not a true road game, but when you've seen Tennessee in some of those road spots, 6-3 on the road as a favorite thus far in the Josh Heupel era. So away from Neyland Stadium on Saturday has been a spot in the past which Tennessee's actually been pretty comfortable. And there is something really fishy about this line. I think that first blush, it feels like it should maybe be a little bit higher. The fact that it's not would seem to tell you something, but it doesn't tell me enough to change my mind here. I think that Tennessee could perhaps deliver a little bit of a statement on Saturday that it is maybe a bigger part of the playoff prognostication story in the SEC than maybe at one time seemed they would be. I do like Tennessee minus this number. lot of action here on the Vols. Dar, you want to go with the flow and take Tennessee?
Tennessee definitely looks the part. They look great week one. There's tons of talents on both sides of the ball. I love their offense. NC State struggled at Western Carolina. And, it's just one of those games where I'm actually going to take the points in the Wolfpack here. I have way more confidence in like Tennessee winning by double digits in the game than I do NC State covering. And I really don't think I see NC State winning this game in any fashion. But for some reason, I feel like NC State's going to get up for this game being played in Carolina Panther Stadium. I think this is going to be like a high-scoring shootout, both teams in the 30s, and NC State's going to get backdoor cover late in this game.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I don't think that's a terrible pick at all, and especially kind of going against the grain of some of what you've heard from the rest of the panel here. There could be something to that. As I said before, oftentimes when lines are lower than you expect them to be or different than you expect them to be, somebody sometimes knows something that you don't, worth keeping in mind when it comes to things like this. Now, that plus the 5 games we pick as a part of Go With The Flow will make up what we call our board picks. This is what our season-long standings are based off of. But there's also a chance to sort of cherry pick some other games kind of beyond just the regular slate. And that's what the final portion of our conversation is about here. So, Mike Griffith, I come back to you. Is there anything beyond the major games that you find interesting from a point spread perspective? Is there a best bet that you want to give us here for this week?
Yeah, Nick Saban left Tuscaloosa, but the kaleidoscope has not crashed to the ground. I'm going to take Kalen DeBoer and Alabama to cover that 31-point spread this week.
So that against a Middle Tennessee State team that we saw have its issues with Georgia's opponent, Tennessee Tech, this past Saturday. Jeff Sentell, how about for you? A best bet for you beyond the regular slate?
Quick one. I got over-under city. Give me the under. Texas, Michigan, I saw that at 43.5 on BetMGM. And give me the over on North Carolina State and Tennessee, 59.5.
All right, so Jeff on both sides of an over-under there with a couple of interesting games. Connor Raleigh, how about for you?
Yes, we've got Georgia Tech -3 on the road against Syracuse. I'm not exactly sold on Syracuse there. I don't feel great about this, but give me Colorado +7.5 against Nebraska. Colorado didn't look great, but there's no point in worrying about spilled water. So give me Colorado +7.5 there. I don't trust Matt Rule just yet. I thought about going the under on Iowa State El Assico this week, but there's another game that Mike referenced that I actually like a lot more, and I found a good number here for it. I like South Florida +31.5. It's a big number, but I like this South Florida team. Gave Alabama problems a year ago when that game's played in Tampa. I know it's in Tuscaloosa. I like what Alex Golsh is doing there. Give me South Florida +31.5.
So a little bit of a Riverside of our best bets here with Connor and Mike on opposite sides of that one. That's pretty fun in a game that was somewhat surprising a year ago. 2-1 for me last week with my – actually, let me get Kaylee Manziel here. Kaylee Manziel, how about for you? Best bets for you on anything on the board beyond the major picks we've already made?
Yeah, my best bet hit last week, so I'm going to ride with my Kennesaw State Owls until they let me down. They're a 14.5-point underdog to Louisiana Lafayette, so give me the Owls plus the points. All
right, there you go. So Kaylee on the side of the home state team there with Kennesaw State. For me, 2-1 last week with the best bets. Gave you Hawaii against UCLA. That sailed to the finish line. You love to see that. Especially proud of that one. Loser with Tech on the side of Georgia State. I don't remember what the third one was now, but I did win it. So the point is, I don't love the board this week. Not in love with this at all, but I will give you this. I like Illinois +5.5 against Kansas. You think about Brett Bielema, typically a pretty good coach against the spread. That number sort of sticks out to me a little bit. I'll take the Illini against the Kansas team that perhaps not quite what it was in recent years. I kind of like that. And I also like the under 52.5 for Clemson Appalachian State. I think there are some things offensively with Clemson that probably don't get cured simply by playing a team other than Georgia. I don't think Clemson's very good. I think Appalachian State's good enough to limit possessions with its own running game here. Run clock. We've seen some pretty low possession totals in some games across college football already through 2 weeks here this season. I like the under 52.5 for Clemson Appalachian State. I like Illinois +5.5 against Kansas. Dari, how about for you? Any best bets here this week?
Yeah, I actually like USF and the points against Alabama. That's a game that I think USF is going to easily cover in that game. It's too many points. I'm also going to channel my inner Connor and take the under 35.5 in the Iowa State game. I'm also going to take the under 45.5 in the Northern Illinois Notre Dame game. I think Notre Dame's going to win that, but their defense is going to keep the total points down in that game.
All right, so strong picks there across the board, and obviously a part of what we'll do each week on our Go With The Flow presented by R.S. Andrews, which airs starting at noon across all DawgNation video channels. So if you're here as a part of the R.S. Andrews and Go With The Flow, make sure you check out, I should say, if you're a part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down, make sure you check out Go With The Flow on the DawgNation video channels coming up later on today. So one thing to notice, how many times I try to say R.S. Andrews Cool Down, accidentally say R.S. Andrews Go With The Flow, keeping the different shows straight. Not an easy thing to do. We're obviously back live here, and we're about a half an hour away from the debut for all of our picks for the week on Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews. Let me take a couple of final comments before we get there. And, of course, looking forward to a fun game day tomorrow on all of that. Rambo looking forward to a good day. He says, come out strong against those evil Eagles. I like all of that. Scott Harris says, I think it takes a certain skill set to play the Tennessee offense. Listen, I don't take great pleasure in what I said a moment ago, but the truth is I do think that Tennessee has a little bit of a chance to make a bit of a statement tomorrow. And I do think that Tennessee is sort of bound to get more chatter as the season goes on than it probably was getting prior to the season beginning. I do feel that way. We'll see if I'm wrong. I'm wrong frequently, but that is sort of the opinion that I have. KC says, I'm not sold on Nebraska's defense to beat Colorado. This is obviously a big performance for Shedeur Sanders and the Buffaloes a year ago. I think some folks think that the presence of Dylan Raiola in this game gives Nebraska a little more firepower than maybe they would have had a year ago. It's kind of interesting. Through 2 weeks last year, Colorado was the most talked about team in college football. They're not, to my mind, generating anywhere near that same level of chatter right now, although it's obvious that Travis Hunter, playing a lot of snaps, is clearly one of the best players in the country. You kind of wonder, is this a day in which the Nebraska chatter, I should say the Colorado chatter, sort of returns, or have people sort of settled in and kind of figured out what Colorado is? An exciting team that just doesn't win very much. They did slip past, North Dakota State, week 0, whatever. So, they haven't been a huge factor in this season yet. We'll see if they are able to regain some of that early season hype they had a year ago. Johnny Surf Dog, looking forward to some big surfing there in Jacksonville Beach. He says the waves are smoking. Johnny, I'm glad to hear you enjoying that. Armando Black TV says Nebraska will beat Colorado by more than 2 touchdowns. So Armando weighing in strong. We appreciate that. Caleb Meyer says, did I ever think I'd be making a living talking Georgia football with UGA greats? Life is wild. No, Caleb, you're exactly right. I never would have imagined that. Even my wildest dreams probably growing up. Life can definitely take you on some really interesting twists and turns. And I think the only thing I can be is just grateful for the fact that I get this chance. Not just to talk to UGA greats, but honestly, I have as much fun talking to all of you as anything else. So, Caleb, I appreciate you saying that, and I am truly, truly thankful for that experience. All right, couple of finals here. Jeff Ingram says the Gators going to have Dark Visor as interim coach before the year is over. They may very well have somebody as an interim coach before it's all said and done. Kent Holcomb, Jacob O'Neill. Yeah, so we're on the Peachtree Sports Network. So you can also, this may be the easiest way to watch it there as well. Our friends at Atlanta News First, that's the old CBS 46. Our friends at Atlanta News First, really easy streaming platform for that now. So if you just go to like Atlanta News First and click the watch live type of deal, pretty easy to find that on stream. Easier to find our game tonight than the Georgia game tomorrow, I believe. If I had to guess, I believe that's probably the case. So we'll look forward to seeing you there for that. Sam Burke says, I need to come to a game and meet some of you great dog fans. I'd love for it, Sam. We'll be there at the UGA bookstore after every home game. We'd love to see you there. And if Sam can't be there this week, for all of you who can be, I'm looking forward to seeing all of you there as well. Hope you enjoy the first big home game of the year, whether you're watching it at your home with your friends or in Athens with 93,000 of your closest friends. Hope you make it a great experience. Please come by and see us at the UGA bookstore for our DawgNation postgame show. Kaylee will have you at noon tomorrow there at the Jittery Joe's downtown, new location for that, for DawgNation pregame. And I'll, of course, see you back here Monday for DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. Enjoy every minute of it. Thank you to Dari Pero, R.S. Andrews, who make the R.S. Andrews Cool Down possible. Find them online, rsandrews.com. Plumbing issues. Don't let the plumbing issue ruin your weekend. If your water heater goes out, don't forget, in many cases, R.S. Andrews can replace that water heater for you the same day. And all kinds of plumbing issues like that. They are more than ready to get it done for you. So please find them online at rsandrews.com. Have a great weekend, everybody. Enjoy the game. Back here Monday, DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. We'll look forward to talking to you then.